Hey guys, I'm excited for you guys to watch this video. I was so surprised to receive all your stories and experiences in the forums. You sent in so many and they're all really interesting. We still have a lot more to get through, but if you want to participate in this series of videos, the link to the forum submission will be in the description. I also decided to just read them in order of when they were sent in so as to not skip over any good ones. I don't think I have any other channel business to talk about right now, other than I will be doing another live stream toward the end of the month. I really enjoyed hanging out with everyone and playing Stardew for the first time. Maybe we could play Stardew again or another game. I haven't figured out how to stream drawing on the screen yet, but maybe I could try that too. If you have any fun suggestions of what you'd like to see me do on live, leave them in the comments below. The last thing I want to say before getting into the spooky stories is that I won't be making a whole video dedicated to Amber's not recent response to me coming forward. She didn't really have anything significant or new to say. To save you the time if you haven't seen it or don't know what I'm talking about, she has called me a liar across multiple platforms through Instagram stories and members only lives. She admits she was unhinged at the time but still refuses to admit to anything she's done. She says I'm lying and exaggerating but doesn't say what it is I'm lying about. She says she was vulnerable at the time, which is true. I took care of her during some of her most vulnerable moments. Maybe I wasn't the perfect partner, but I did everything I could for her, more than anyone else in her life was doing for all those years. But she has always seen me as less than her and deserving of her mistreatment and responsible for her care. She believed it so much that it made me believe it about myself. But now I see more clearly how I was being manipulated and taken advantage of. She says multiple times how it's been so long since any of this happened. It was so many years, and yes, it was a while back now, but not that long ago. We started dating in 2017 and we broke up in 2021. I took time to reflect on what I could remember and make sense of what happened. I did my best and I'm still trying to do my best to move on. But sometimes talking about it is what is necessary. And in this situation, which is admittedly a weird situation, I needed to add my own narrative publicly. I can't change what happened. I can only change how I accept and react to these things. There's no such thing as a perfect victim, and there is no such thing as a time limit on when you can and can't talk about what you experienced. She can try to apologize, but I don't need her apology, and if I'm being honest, I don't think she's ever genuinely been sorry for anything she's done. I can only hope that Amber actually sees a therapist and learns how to reflect on her past actions without deflecting blame. But I won't be holding my breath. As much as she says she's changed, I see a lot of the same old patterns. I don't think many of us are fooled by it, and you have not changed in 4 years, and that's what's evident. I hope you have the day you deserve. That's the last thing I'll say about any of that in this video. As spooky as Girl World can be, some of these stories may be even spookier. Again, thanks to everyone who sent in their story, and now let's get into it. Keep in mind, I don't really believe in ghosts, but I still can't explain what I saw. During an extreme delusional episode, I checked myself into the emergency room. In the beginning, I wasn't hearing any voices or experiencing any hallucinations. Put it simply, I thought I had been possessed by the devil and thought the government was sending me messages to check myself into the hospital. I stayed in the emergency room for a few days, locked in a single room since I had tried escaping multiple times. This entire experience was one big scene, but one part specifically stuck out. One part I'm still hung up on to this day. Sometime around the morning, I noticed a patient in his blue scrubs across the hall was getting ready to be discharged by the staff. Standing there watching through the glass pane, eagerly waiting for my turn, I look rightward towards the room next door, seeing what looks like a male patient in a white gown sitting towards the end of his bed, not moving at all, just sitting there facing the other way. The closer I look, I realize the guy is actually see-through, almost as if you change a layer's opacity to 50% in Photoshop. Upon looking even closer, I realize not only is there an apparition at the end of the bed, but I noticed the apparition seems to almost be a projection of a real man laying in the bed. I could see the lower half of his laying body, but that part was 100% opacity and not an apparition. So basically, a sleeping body with a sitting apparition at the end wearing the same clothes. In order to make sure I wasn't hallucinating or dreaming, I rubbed my eyes a bunch, walked around in circles, pinched myself, covered one eye at a time, closed my eyes for a while before opening them and looking back. Meanwhile, the apparition was still there. Hello. So, I'm from Arkansas, Oklahoma. My husband and I lived next to my in-laws when we first got married. We put a trailer on their property where an old schoolhouse used to sit, but had since burned down. At least that's what they told me. We had a couple things happen that were strange, and this was out in the country, so very rural area. Since we lived so close to my in-laws, we would frequently eat supper over with them. And one day I was walking back to my trailer, and I heard a very friendly hello from my mother-in-law's fenced-in garden, again out in the country. There was a road lamp, so I could have seen if someone was there, but there was no one. I remember kinda saying hello back. They sounded friendly. The next thing that happened was, since it was a trailer house, single wide, I left my husband in the living room and went to the bathroom in our bedroom. When I left the bathroom, a really loud voice said, "Really?" right behind me into my ear. I spun around thinking he had snuck into the bedroom to scare me. I spun around to hit him, but there was no one there. He was still in the living room where I had left him. Again, a single wide trailer. He couldn't have gotten past me. I immediately just went to crying because it scared me so bad. This happened between 1999 and 2004, and it isn't something that has continued since we moved. So I don't think it is in my head, you know? So we moved away from there for a long time, but around 2018, we had to move back and put another trailer in that same spot. Stuff started happening again. I would see my husband go to one end of the house only for him to still be on the other end. One night we were laying in bed together about to fall asleep, and a woman's breathy voice said, "We've got none at all," right above our heads. My husband said, "What was that?" I said, "I don't know, but I'm glad you heard it too." Apart from my mother-in-law calling me to tell my husband and my son to get inside because it had just started snowing that night and she'd heard them playing out in the snow. I informed her that they had been in bed for over an hour at that point, but that's about the only confirmation I have that other people were also hearing things. Anyway, I don't live there anymore. Congrats on the channel. I have a lot of paranormal instances, but for now I'll stick with the first one I remember and the one that still haunts me decades later. Happened when I was 12. I'm now 39. The first one I remember, my Aunt Mary had bone cancer and ended up having this huge knot on top of her right forearm. She would hit it on stuff and it really hurt, so she ended up being bedbound, too weak to get up toward the end. Her husband was an absolute jerk once she could no longer cook for him. In fact, one time he said he was hungry. She couldn't get out of bed, so he went to McDonald's to get food, only for himself, and proceeded to sit and eat it in front of her. At her funeral, they had an open casket with a light above her head, and people were going up to pay their respects. Once her husband got up there, he said, "I love you," and bent down to kiss her cheek, and the light above her blew out. Loud pop and everything. I was still a kid, but I remember seeing her silhouette there. I knew it was as if she was saying, "Like heck you do." The one that still haunts me. Okay, so my grandma was my whole world. I was super attached to her. I even used to say it felt like we were connected by an invisible umbilical cord. The further away from her I was, the more I hurt inside. When she was 70, she went to the hospital for pneumonia, and she had been there a while. We had visited her the night before she was supposed to be discharged. It was all planned out that my Uncle Scott would pick her up at 9 a.m. and I'd go spend the night after school. She was looking so much better, and she says she was feeling much better as well. The next day I woke up at 4 a.m. feeling the presence of someone in my doorway. I never shut my bedroom door at that age. And there she was, my grandma, standing in the threshold of my door and smiling. She wasn't levitating or see-through. She was wearing my favorite gown of hers, but one thing was missing. Her oxygen that she always had to wear. As soon as I thought about that, she vanished and the phone rang. I was in a complete mess of tears when my mom came in to tell me that Scott was calling to tell us she passed away. Later, I found out that sometime during the night, the doctors had gave her cough syrup with codeine, and had they had bothered to look at the chart on the end of her bed, they would have realized that she was allergic to codeine. This not only sent me spiraling into deep depression that I sometimes still feel to this day, but it also made me very distrusting of doctors to the point of paranoia. My story isn't very spooky, but it did scare me at the time. I work at a hospital in the UK, and I came in early in the morning to prepare a morning clinic. When I walked into the room, it felt a bit off initially, but I didn't think anything of it and turned on the light. I then went to unlock the door to the next room. This is where we do outpatient procedures, but to my knowledge, our whole clinic used to be part of operating theaters many, many years ago. The room was dark, and before I could turn on the lights, I very clearly saw a person in a hospital gown standing in front of the resusc trolley. Crash cart in the U.S., looking at the defibrillator. I was startled because I thought it was a patient who had somehow gained access to the room. I was even more surprised when I noticed the person was hovering over the floor. They slowly turned towards me, then turned away and floated towards the other treatment room and through the door. I could feel a profound sadness in the room when I finally turned on the lights. I went and unlocked all the other rooms, just to make sure it actually wasn't a lost patient. But the door they had just floated through was still locked. I wonder if it was the ghost of someone who had died there while the clinic was still part of the operating theater several years ago. This isn't my story, but my mother's, and it has always terrified me, especially because of the look on her face whenever she tells it. My family comes from a small island, and when my mother was a little girl, they lived on farmland with cornfields stretching behind their house. My grandfather was a heavy drinker, and one night he stood outside yelling, cursing at God and then at the devil, mocking him and claiming he didn't exist. A few minutes later, my mother heard him screaming. He came running into the house, crying his eyes out in front of my grandmother. He kept saying the devil had appeared to him and spoken to him. He even pulled her outside to show her where he saw the devil. He was an utter mess, but assuming he was just drunk and imagining things, my grandmother just helped him to bed. She did, however, tell my mother not to go to that area. The next morning, my mother went outside and saw a large scorched patch in the cornfield, the exact spot where my grandfather claimed to have seen the devil. Nothing ever grew there again, and no matter how much time passed, the area always smelled off. Years ago, I randomly started finding baby clothes in my dryer. It was always at the end of a drying cycle. I started paying close attention. No baby clothes going in the hamper, none went in the washer. No baby clothes when I moved the clothes to the dryer. But whenever I'd take my clothes out of the dryer, I'd find baby clothes. No one else had access to my home or laundry during these times, or much of any times. My partner didn't live with me then, and didn't visit often. And I don't often have guests over. Also, I didn't have anyone in my life at the time who had babies or very small children. And my friends with older kids didn't visit, and I didn't babysit. There was no situation where their clothes, let alone their old baby clothes, ever came into my possession. And yet, I kept finding baby clothes in my freshly dried clothes. Well, a few months later, I got pregnant. I should also mention baby was a surprise. I was not out buying baby clothes in hopes this would happen. And it was just a little bit after I'd gotten pregnant when my cat started refusing to come inside. This is a cat that had lived with me since she was a baby. She loved me. But after I'd gotten pregnant, the cat basically lived outside. She'd stay not too far from the front door. And the weirder part was that she'd meow at me. Anytime I'd walk by, I could see her. She was staring me down, meowing. It was like a long, drawn-out, deep, moaning meow every time she saw me. It was so very unsettling. And she wouldn't let me anywhere near her. When my mother was around, someone my cat was familiar with, she was fine with my mom petting her. I'd heard that cats can behave differently when their owners become pregnant, but I wasn't expecting it to be so extreme. Once I had the baby, the cat came in, but she was skittish and not really the same after that. I used to work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. My job at the time used to own several buildings. However, you would be mainly stationed at one. We weren't really allowed to go to the other building, but my position gave me reasons to almost every night. It was about a 5-minute walk, and I used it mostly as a break away from my coworkers. It was a dark road that didn't have much light other than the signs of the other closed businesses. I would often see dark shadows in the corner of my eye, like someone walked towards me, or a lady hunched over by a bush. My co-workers also talked about that lady. When you would look, nothing would be there. But the thing I think about the most, even though it's been years, is this. On my way back to my main building, I saw this huge bird sitting on the edge of the building I was leaving. I was looking at it, and as I walked, trying to figure out how big it was, it jumped off the building I was leaving, over my head, and right to the building I'm stationed at. Its wingspan was huge, bigger than any bird I'd ever seen. Now I needed to figure this thing out. I'm staring at it, and I could feel it sizing me up. I thought maybe it was going to fly down and attack me. Dumb to stay put, but oh well. I started trying to take photos, but my camera wouldn't focus. Then it looked like it unpinned its sharp ears, and the long skinny tail started flicking back and forth behind its back. The thing I saw fly from one building to another now looked like a cat, and it stayed there, looking down on me. I was able to get a really grainy video of the so-called cat, and I sent it to my husband. Years ago, I worked at the Clement Railroad Hotel Museum in Dixon, Tennessee. It's a museum now, but it was built 112 years ago to be a hotel. Sometimes, especially at night, weird things would happen. I swear more than once I was walking up the steps. If I really was stomping, I would hear a woman yelling at me to be quiet. We joked that it was our manager. Once during an event, we had a lot of people there, and a cat ran through the middle of the room and behind the piano in the room Governor Frank Clement was born in. The staff searched everywhere and never found a cat. Weird thing is, weeks later, we had a school group and the kids say they saw a cat running through. There was especially one room upstairs that was really creepy. More than once when you'd turn the light off, it would look like someone was standing in the middle of the room. Scared the heck out of me every time. I don't work there anymore, and they're doing good with tours, but I wouldn't want to be there at night alone. Okay, so this is going to be a collection of small stories from a house my family and I moved into when I was a teenager. The first time something unexplainable happened was one of the first nights we moved in. It was the middle of the night and my family was asleep. I was up late playing video games. I heard a crashing sound come from our kitchen downstairs, like someone had knocked something over. When I went to the kitchen, an old coffee tin my mom used to hold large utensils was on the floor, but it was far away from the counter, like it had been thrown. Also, all the utensils that were once in the coffee tin were now arranged into a perfect arch shape on the floor. I just sort of stood there, not knowing how to make sense of it. I didn't want to acknowledge that it might have been something paranormal because I grew up in a religious home, so things like that were sort of taboo. I convinced myself that maybe my cat knocked it over and went to bed. A few weeks later, it was just my mom and I at the house. She went to the basement to do some laundry and I heard her yell. I ran downstairs and the laundry detergent bottle was in the middle of the room and had leaked everywhere. Must have been 5 feet from where it was normally sitting and had been too full for my 8-pound cat to knock over. I looked at my mom waiting for her to try and explain how that happened. She jokingly said, "We have a ghost, I guess." I didn't feel comfortable enough to share what had happened to me the other night. A few more weeks go by and it's almost Easter. My brother was looking for our childhood Easter baskets. He stopped at the doorway of my room and got my attention. I had my headset on. And he asked me if I knew where the Easter baskets were. Suddenly, our Easter baskets flew out of the top shelf of my closet like someone had thrown them. My brother was shocked at what he had just saw, and I told him about the weird stuff that had been happening. My brother's a very logical person and not superstitious, but even he couldn't explain the objects we were looking for flying out of my closet. The next time something strange happened, I was home alone. I was in our game room, and right across the hall was a bathroom. When I was on the computer, my back was to the door. I was focused on whatever game I was playing when I heard someone coming up the stairs. At this time, my aunt had moved in with us, so there was a total of 5 people living in the house. They walked up the stairs and into the bathroom, shut the door, and turned on the shower. I paid no mind because I assumed my aunt had come home from work. After a bit, the shower turned off, and the door opened, and they walked downstairs. I had not turned around the whole time, but after they went downstairs, I decided I would go and get something to eat. When I turned around, I could see into the bathroom. There was no steam that had fogged up the mirror. This was only a few minutes after the shower had been turned off. I went into the bathroom, and the shower was completely dry. I started to panic a little, questioning everything that I'd just heard. I went downstairs to look at our driveway to see if someone had come home. My car was the only one there. One by one, I called all my family members to ask if any of them had come home, but no one had. My mom told me to lock all the doors, and she would be coming home soon. After explaining everything to my mom, I just shrugged it off and said maybe I misheard things. But really, I was absolutely terrified. Then there was one night when I was woken up by the sound of my cat growling downstairs in our living room. I called to her, but she just kept growling. I went downstairs and I thought she was growling at something outside, so I go over and pick her up. But when I start to head back to my room, I realize her eyes are still locked onto whatever she was growling at, but she wasn't looking at the window. It was in the middle of the living room. I I start to panic and I bring her upstairs and lightly close my door so it is closed but not latched closed. I had a baby gate in front of my door, so it didn't allow me to close it all the way. I set my cat down on the bed and her eyes are locked on my door, like she was waiting for something to come in. I tell myself it's nothing and try to fall back asleep. I don't remember falling back asleep, but something woke me up again. Footsteps, right outside my door. My door slowly opened and I closed my eyes, too scared to acknowledge what was happening. I heard a very distinct, heel-toe step like someone wearing boots was walking on our hardwood floor. But that's what was weird. In my room, I had a giant shaggy rug that covered most of my room. But the footsteps were so clearly heading into my room and up to my bed. My eyes still closed, I heard the footsteps get right next to my bed and then turn around and walked out of my room. I didn't fall back asleep that night. After that, I figured that if whatever was doing these weird things wanted to hurt me, it would have that night. So maybe it was just wanting to get my attention. I ended up calling it George, and he would occasionally throw things or mess with my electronics, but no more creepy footsteps or taking showers. We later found out from our neighbors that the family that lived there before us were, in their words, awful, which explained a lot because before we moved in we found lots of random stuff. They also left behind full loads of laundry inside the washer and dryer, including kids' clothing. There were rocks and dirt in the vents, and someone had hidden flasks of alcohol all around the house. On my brother's door, there was a chain lock on the outside and small brown handprints that went up the wall to the ceiling. The neighbors told us that the family's oldest son had died of an overdose in the home. I never learned his name, but I always imagined that George was just a teenager like me who was bored and wanted to be noticed. I've never really believed in the paranormal, but I had this one admittedly kind of lame experience, and I'm not sure what to make of it. It was 2019 and I was living in Stellenbosch, South Africa, near Cape Town, for a co-op job. I was living in a house with multiple roommates, so we had a shared kitchen and living room. Whenever I'd use the stove, it felt like someone was standing next to me looking over my right shoulder to see what I was doing. Now here's where it's a little spooky. The way the kitchen was set up, the entrance was to my left if I was standing at the stove, so it would make more sense to feel this presence to my left. It also only happened at the stove, not if I was at the sink, situated opposite to the stove at the other wall, not if I was at the fridge, situated to the right of the stove, or even at the counter to either side of the stove. I didn't feel the presence every time I was at the stove, but I only ever felt it there, never anywhere else in the house. It would only occur if other roommates were around, but also if I was in the house by myself. I don't recall any draft in the kitchen. I wouldn't say I fully believe in the paranormal since this experience, but it has made me more open and certainly more understanding when others tell me their paranormal stories. Thank you for sharing your own stories, and I'm excited to hear others from you in the community. If you made it to the end of this video, I hope you enjoyed it and maybe got a little spooked in the process. I hope it was long enough for you all to dial in and get into it with the ambience and everything. I can't wait to do more like this with the rest of your stories. Right now, I have enough to make a decent amount of videos if you guys are into it. That's all for now. See you in the next one. Bye!